Hey there, everybody. Welcome to the Script and Style Show, the web show where we talk about web development and the people that make it happen. I'm Todd Gardner from Track.js JavaScript Error Monitoring, and my co-host David Walsh, creator of the popular blog davidwalsh.name. How's it going today, David?
Good. How are you? You back from your big conference last week?
Yeah. Back from Kansas City. We did KCDC down there, which is a fantastic event, and then finished it off with a PubConf, which was epic, probably one of our best yet. We had about 200 people packed in a distillery. A distillery is a dangerous place to do a PubConf because they don't price their drinks per drink. They price it per person. It's like, oh, we're just buying this person all that they want to drink of liquor all night long, which turns out to be kind of dangerous, but in a great way. Everybody had a fantastic time, and we have our first ever PubConf 2x champion. Lemon has actually won PubConf twice, which is now a complicated thing. Now I have to figure out like what does a PubConf like Triple Crown look like, and do I make him like retire? And
it's like a wrestling belt. That's what it's got to be.
Yeah, he gets the belt, and then I have to put him on the sidelines. All right, you're too good at this. You have to give somebody else a chance.
So, you've spoken about this a little bit before, but what does it mean to win PubConf? What's going on with that?
So when I invite somebody to do a PubConf, they have a 5-minute talk that is aggressively timed, like they have exactly 5 minutes to make people laugh. It's a joke thing, right? It's comedy. It's technical comedy, but it's comedy. And then at the end of the 10 speakers that I invite, I have some secret judges from the city that we're in help me pick who the best 3 people of the night are who go to be the finalists. The finalists get to do another 5-minute presentation that I made. So they've never seen the slides. I give them a topic. The first slide usually even looks like it might be a legit technical talk. And then it just goes into basically what kind of animation or picture or whatever can I throw up on stage to make them freak out. And so it's improv. They have to tell jokes. Okay. So the audience just claps the loudest for who they think was the winner. And my buddy Lemon, who's here in Minneapolis, has actually won twice. He won both PubConf Minneapolis in May and now PubConf Kansas City last week.
Can I participate remotely? Can I send in some of my old code? Because I swear that would get the most laughs from anybody in the room, maybe even current code.
I'm going to have to ask you to step up and get up on stage and show it off yourself.
Oh. That's more horrific than getting a random image or animation.
All right. Well, we have a guest with us today. Kristina Durivage is joining us. She is a front-end engineer and builder of all these amazing, like, cool hardware projects like the tweet skirt and the sash and the LED umbrella and a bunch of stuff. She's constantly tweeting about it. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Hey, thank you. Thanks so much.
So how we typically kick things off is with you telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this crazy industry thing that we do. So your origin story, where'd you come from?
So my dad's an electrical engineer. So he was always, I remember when I was very young, he would always try to get me to understand electrical diagrams. And like back before like Arduino and hardware became became easier to use, you didn't really see the point of it. Like it was very hard to say like, okay, I have this thing that's lit up now, but I can't do anything with it. So my mom taught me to sew when I was younger, and my dad taught me electronic stuff. Eventually, I stopped being stubborn and learned it kind of when Arduino started coming out. So I went to college for computer science and got into hardware kind of after I was settled into my first job. And I remember what happened was I was sewing on the kitchen table. My parents used to live here. And so I just had everything, for whatever reason, I was over there and I was sewing on the kitchen table. And my dad's ever like, have you ever thought about putting LEDs in that? And I was like, I don't really know how you would do that. And so it became this kind of bouncing ideas back and forth of like, he'd be like, oh, you could do this. And I'm like, well, you know, that wouldn't be washable, or you'd have this problem or that problem, or how would you get stuff to flex correctly, or where would you put batteries? And we started like just, Dad and I came up with like this, just plain like the dumb LEDs, the 2-wire LEDs, like a matrix where you could send stuff in. And it was kind of flexible, but you didn't really want to do, and it was pretty like it wasn't that robust. It was going to break. That basically did it. But we started then kind of growing off of that with LED strips that were a little bit more like the smart LEDs that can be any color that you want. And then just different kinds of hardware to go. And eventually I learned enough that I was kind of able to go my own and start experimenting on my own. So I don't have any kind of formal education in electronics or hardware or anything like that. I know a lot about LEDs, and if it gets out of that, I have to do a lot of Googling to figure anything out. But that's kind of how everything got started there, and I've been playing around ever since.
Awesome. So that's how you got into hardware. What about on the software side?
Oh, software, yeah. Anyway, the part that actually pays the bills. I went to school, Winona State University, and they had just kind of opened, they had like their computer science degree, and they started applied computer science degrees that were more like specialized. And so I was the first person to start this applied computer science, the human-computer interaction, where I didn't have to take like operating system design or some of like the super low or like the lower level ones. I still had to take like a PDP 11 class or whatever, but, and so, yeah, and you take a couple psychology classes instead. And so I did all of that. And then, of course, then my first job where you use something like this is programming in mostly SQL, because that's where you use your user-friendly stuff. Just kidding. But so anyway, that's I started that, and I've just been doing kind of different sorts of very data-heavy, but building like web interfaces on top of pretty data-heavy applications, like stuff for warehouses or stuff for public schools and stuff like that. So it's been a lot of fun. And the thing is, though, is like when I started going, like when I was in high school, I really wanted to be an artist, and so I was trying to find, like, you get into computer science or whatever, and I was missing that creative part a lot. And so when I was able to figure out how to kind of funnel that creativity into doing a hardware project or something that you could do interactive, you could play with, have people interact with hardware. That's filled that for me. So you can still have your more boring day job and then have like a go home and think around with LEDs. So it's really been fun to have that kind of both sides there.
Awesome. So you've gotten to play on both the art side and the computer science side in kind of a little bit of both your day job and kind of at night, right? Because you get to play in the UI. It's a little arty, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's all problem solving. And even like I joked around about SQL and like not being like the most creative, like where you would imagine creativity. But if you have, if your schema is pretty complex and you've got like an old system and you need to figure out how to make something fast, there is an element of creativity to that, of just like figuring out how to solve a problem. So yeah, but it's been fun.
I have seen some creatively bad SQL written. Like, how could we do this in the least efficient way possible? Let's put JavaScript in the database, and then we're going to pull it out and interpret it, and then push it into the HTML.
You've seen that?
Oh
my gosh.
Moment of silence for
yeah, that's frightening.
Well, it's dynamic, right? We put all the dynamic parts of the website in the database so that you don't have to think about them.
I don't know. It's just the whole thing that happened this week about the guy putting the eval statement for Java, like that would go and send your NPM credentials to or it would just eval a paste bin, so he could. I don't know. It just reminds me of that, like. Being able to eval any sort of JavaScript from some random paste bin was just like, you can do that. Wow. How about that?
We should do a whole show about like the crazy stuff that we've seen in production.
It's just like you have your regular hacks, like your actual hacks, and then you have the hacks that people sort of inflict upon themselves.
Well, we'll have beers that show. But I'm excited that Kristina's here because I want to become a hero to my 5-year-old and 2-year-old. And I think if I did some pretty cool, hardware and JavaScript stuff, that would be good. My experience in this realm, I'll call it that. The only thing that I've done is I ordered a Raspberry Pi everything I needed to get it plugged into a TV, and created a recall box and a RetroPie so that they could play the video games that I used to play when all you needed was a Raspberry Pi. So let's talk about, like, where did you start? You mentioned your first experiment with the LEDs, but more recently, when you sort of gained your web development expertise and your school expertise, where did you start so that people know that they can sort of start the same way?
So you're wondering about how I started, like, on the web dev side?
No, more so like, what were your first experimentations with JavaScript and hardware? The first, like, when you started bringing things to life, so to speak.
Well, it was basically like, I had, like, I moved up. I gradually added more and more LEDs to a project. The first, like, LED skirt that had something that was interactive was it had a little, like, I think 8x10 LED array on it, a little square. And it actually, like, it wasn't connected to the internet or anything. It had a little joystick that went up to the belt. And then, like, there's a wire that went through the belt, and you could kind of, the belt had this like comically large little fake bow on it, but you could undo the little bow and take the joystick out, and there was a Tetris game on the skirt that you could play.
No way.
And so I brought this to, I think, Minecon 2013, and it was very apparent that, like, there's no way to make that not awkward. Like, you basically have to kind of stand there in, like, your leg kind of bracing the LED array out so it doesn't move around and people can see it. And then, and people are a respectable distance away, but they're still kind of staring at your, like, upper leg area. And, like, I had opted into this, so I was like, let's figure out a way to make this interactive in a way that people aren't, like, tethered to you. So
I imagine that was prelude to some awkward interactions of, hey, I'm going to stare at your legs for the next 5 minutes while I play a game of Tetris.
Yeah, and I mean, I had invited them into it, so it's fine. But it was still just like, all right, let's, move this. Like, we have the technology to move this, make this interactive. And so that's where, like, I wanted more LEDs. I wanted to have text that scrolled, and having text try to scroll on a very small LED array, it's hard to keep track of the letters that are displaying. So I got, like, I think it's 32x8 instead. And then it's like, well, what kind of text would I want to display on this? Like, where would be a good way for people to effortlessly interact with something like that? And so the tweet skirt came from that, just letting people tweet to either the hashtag or the tweet skirt user. And then there's a curation system in place because it's Twitter. And so how that would work is I would log into a site, a site that I hosted, and look at, like, all the tweets that had been kind of queued up were there, and I could either say decline or accept, and then have it get sent to the skirt and show. And so from that, like, that was fun, but the problem there was lag from it, because you send the tweet, it goes up into the system, I have to queue it up, or it gets queued up there, I have to accept it, it has to get queued up to actually display, and then it displays. And I was then looking like, well, this is fun and it's nice and interactive, but there's, like, this delay that people don't want. And so that's when I moved to the Sash that does off of text messages. And I figured with the Sash, I would only bring it to, like, places with a mature audience that, and then people are a little bit more, they want to guard their phone number. They don't want to do, like, their phone number is more tied to their identity. So they're a little bit better at not doing complete garbage. So yeah, and then that doesn't have anything, I don't have to interact with that at all. It just goes right to the Sash.
So before we move on to other things that you've done, we need, like, what is the hardware stack that you're using for this, and what software?
So I use, for all of these projects, a thing called the Particle Photon. So Particle is a startup that started here in Minneapolis, which is very exciting. And the great thing about the Particle Photon is, so you have to write, I mean, you can write it in, I think they have their own ports to other stuff, but you write it in wiring, which is like the C-based language that you use for Arduino. But so you write a function of hardware code to do a thing, and you do, like, particle.function, and then you name it something, and then that exposes it to the Particle cloud. So then you do a REST call that's a post or a get or whatever, and you can get data. Like if you have a thermometer, you can get temperature data out. You can send function call or call a function from an API call, and then have that interact with hardware that way. So that was like, you know, as someone who's like a web engineer or like who does web stuff all the time, you just like, you know how APIs work and you can interact with it like that. And what I like a lot about that is I can keep that separate. Like I can write all of my hardware code, and then I can write my API or my server code that interacts with it, and I can debug them separately. So yeah, and then having that, like that communication happen between the server and my hardware, taken care of with the Particle Cloud is like, I don't want to have to maintain something like that. And it works really, really nice.
Okay. And then a particle photon, I just looked it up here on Amazon. It's I guess it's similar to a Raspberry Pi. That's like the board and you can add components to it and stuff.
I would say it's more similar to an Arduino.
Okay.
Like a Raspberry Pi is a full computer. So you have to plug in a monitor and a keyboard, and you have to give it an operating system. And to have the Raspberry Pi work with the project, you have to configure it to try to be as efficient as possible. And an Arduino is a lot simpler. It has pins. You plug it in, you program it to do the pin, like to interact with the pins, and it just does the thing. There's no operating system. There's less of one. I'm sure there's something that runs it under the covers, but you don't have to think about it. It's more of a device than it is like a whole computer.
Okay.
And the Photon's more like that.
Awesome. So after this wildly successful tweet skirt, what was next? Like, how did you ramp up?
It was the Sash mostly after that, and then I wrote a book chapter about the Sash, and I've been doing other stuff. And my next thing that I really want to do is, of course, more LEDs. Like, there's always got to be more LEDs.
You always got to put more lights on things.
More lights.
Yeah, absolutely more lights. Absolutely bigger batteries. Let's make it. I'm not uncomfortable anymore with this stuff because I don't have a bunch of batteries. So let's fix that and have a ton of batteries and a ton of lights. So I did like there's a podcast called The Adventure Zone, and there's a character in it that has a magic umbrella. And I wanted to cosplay this character, and I was like, I can put LEDs and things, so like, let's try to make an LED umbrella. So the umbrella has a bunch of LEDs in it. It's not connected up to anything. It just does little, like a pattern of colors. So I built that. That was fun, just to try to be like, really stretch like a non-traditional LED environment and try to get it to fit in there, and figuring out how that worked. And I think that I've done little like smaller projects here and there. That was kind of my last really big one, is the Umbra staff, the umbrella. And then the book chapter came out, and I completely documented how to do the Sash. We can link that later. And I think that's kind of it. I've been doing a lot. I also bought a house, so I've been doing a lot of house stuff, which I can't talk about. It's really boring, but
you can't talk about, or you shouldn't talk about.
I probably shouldn't, because it's super boring.
I'm imagining a house of LEDs. Christmas at your house must be the best.
So I started that, and then I don't know. I needed to put, I didn't really have a plan, and I put LEDs up, and it looked kind of sad. And so then, I don't know, I have to rethink my LED plan for my house.
Yeah, I'm imagining a grid of LEDs that completely covers the outside of your house like a paint job. And so you change the color of your house by just hitting it, like by tweeting, I want my house to be blue today, and they all just rotate, or they go with the seasons. And you put noise activator, so when somebody like really loud comes down the street, it just says "fuck you, asshole."
Well, yeah, I was gonna say quiet. It's not real
you're nicer than I am.
Yeah, well, it's not real until the neighbors are complaining. So, but yeah, I do want to do more LED like light Christmas light stuff. I don't know. Last year I made an attempt, and then quickly gave up on it. So,
okay, so you mentioned with your stack of your project that you're using Particle. You write some services in the cloud. You write some code in the device itself to turn it into the device that you want it to do. But I think you said you do it in C, right?
It's a version of C. So I don't know actual C. This is just kind of what I've gleaned from other people talking. But wiring is the language, and that was the language that the Arduino sort of got popular on. And I think they abstract some of the complexity away, and there's different functions that you can call in wiring that make it a lot more streamlined for doing Arduino or calling pins and that kind of thing. That's the reason why Arduino got super popular, is just because you didn't have to learn all of C to do a thing. You could use wiring and learn a little bit. Like, you still, like, the language is still a little low level, but you could kind of go at it and don't have to learn the whole entirety of the language.
Now, I think I heard about some tools that you can use to write JavaScript actually on those low-level devices, like NodeBots, and I think there's another one.
Yeah, Cylon, I think it is.
Yeah. So why was that just didn't work with the particle, or was there some other reason why you just didn't want to do that?
So it works in the particle now, last I checked. To be honest, I don't follow the node. I follow them kind of like I'm happy for the stuff they do. But I don't know all the new hot news from the NodeBots community. But they do have stuff now where you can run NodeBots on the particle system. But for me, it was just about like when I started, it wasn't there, or I didn't know about it. And I run into enough problems debugging the code that I've got that's in the language that it's sort of without that abstraction layer on it. That for me, like to write it in that C or in that language to figure it out and debug it, that's what makes sense for what I'm doing, I guess. But I should really look at it again someday. It's really nice. It's great for teaching. You can write your full thing in JavaScript, and you don't have to try to balance two languages. But for me, since I'd already kind of gotten used to it with other programming, and like I know how to debug it pretty well, I just never really needed to. If that makes sense.
That sounds like exactly why I never got into CoffeeScript.
Yeah, I mean, there's cool stuff. So, I mean, they have boards out there now too, like the Esperino, I believe, is one where you write JavaScript. The Tessel was one that was like that. And those were special microcontroller boards that you would use and write JavaScript, or I think Lua on them. And then the other stuff is like the NodeBots and everything else, where there's a thing called Fermata, which is like you write, I'm going to screw this up probably. There's a really, really great talk, which I can send a link to later, that explains all this stuff. But like Fermata is like the full low-level stuff that runs on the Arduino. And there's JavaScript libraries that you write JavaScript, it exports it out to Fermata, and then that goes on the Arduino. And so that's how that all works. But yeah, I haven't really followed it much because like I've already figured kind of out the whole thing that I used to build stuff. So.
And do you have a blog, or do you have resources you can recommend for where people can sort of learn this to get started?
I mean, the Arduino kits that you can get online that kind of they start you out with like blink an LED, or here's a temperature sensor, you can get data back from it, and then make the LED light up if it's hot or cold or whatever. I really like those, and I recommend them a lot. And I think just the thing that's missing, like when I first started hearing about this stuff, I didn't get really excited about it, was so you build something on a breadboard, and you've got a light on a breadboard and whatever, and you have to, it's super like fragile, and if you try to bring it anywhere, like your LED might fall out or it might break or something, and it sucks. And so the thing to remember is like to cut yourself a lot of slack in that process of getting used to using some of these components, because once you have the foundations going, and once you know how to light up that LED and how to make like components talk to each other, you can put that in anything. Like I worked with my friend Jerry on a kitchen like I bought it off Craigslist. It was some super pink frilly like kids kitchen. And there's
like one of those play sets for kids where they had like a pretend oven and
easy bake oven, that sort of thing.
No, I didn't have any component, like it didn't do anything. It was just a plastic fake thing. And it was really cheap, which worked out well because we hacked it apart and like cut everything apart, and we put sensors in it. And like all of that game is everything that comes in those Arduino starter kits of like touch sensors and little switches and lights and whatever. And it was just hot gluing a lot of the thing, like drilling holes and hot gluing stuff in place. And we made a game where like the kitchen would tell you different things to do. Like there is like a row of different like ingredients, and like the light underneath the ingredient would light up, and you had to put that on the pan, or you had to turn the like the little oven thing on or whatever. And there's like a little internal timer on the Arduino, and then once the time ran out, it would see how many points you had. And like that's all stuff that comes in those Arduino starter kits. It's just when you're getting like when you get started, it's usually because you have an idea in mind or you have some sort of goal that you want to get to, and you'll get there by starting with these kits. It's just like, don't worry when your first couple projects or the first couple things you do look like they're going to fall apart. Like that's just temporary. You can, once you get that kind of going, you can put that in whatever form you want to do. It's just hot gluing stuff in place. So
in fairness, I've been writing software for like 20 years, and everything I write looks like it's about to fall apart. So, but that's very good advice. That's very good advice for sure.
So on the server side of your projects, you build like you said that you try and put like most of the logic in the cloud somewhere, you know, handling requests, stuff like that, which totally makes sense. What do you use there? Like how do you put that together?
So I try to make sure that what I sent, like the stuff that's on the particle, is just assuming that like I don't want to do like error checking on the particle. Like there's just not that much space for it. So like and you don't write
any bugs.
Yeah. Well, okay. Thank you. That's but you know, like I just assume like I will send the photon a string and it will display that string. And on the server side, that's when you get input from Twitter, and that's where you want to strip out all of your bad characters, or when people try to send you poop emojis, and it's like, well, that's not going to work. But and you just want to make sure that on the server, it takes care of all of like talking to other services. So like the TextAsh uses Twilio, the TweetSkirt uses a Twitter API, and just send stuff to the particle APIs as, you know, what you would want to show. And all of the projects use an Express server. There's a public facing website for a lot of them. Oh, I forgot to talk about the PixelBot too. That was another project. But for that one, so the PixelBot, so the Sash was let's speed up text, and then the PixelBot was let's speed up interactions. And so the PixelBot is this little, and I don't have this on my portfolio either because I'm terrible, but it's this little like I think 4x5 LEDs on this little toy robot, and you pull up a website and there's 4x5 little black dots on the screen and a little color picker. And so you choose your colors, and then you poke at the dots, and then those LEDs light up. And that's me trying to get that as fast as possible. Like it still has to go up to the cloud and then go back down. So it's not instantaneous. Like when I bring it to Maker Faire, these little kids, they just start poking on everything, and that doesn't really work that great. But yeah, so it's always an Express server with some sort of public website if I need to have some sort of interaction for something, and some sort of process that will monitor, like Twilio monitoring, looking in for new text messages for Twitter, looking for new tweets, and I use Forever.js to keep them running. But yeah, and then Amazon Lightsail for everything else.
So what would you say? Are there any differences between when you're building one of these little Express servers for your fun projects versus how you would write stuff at your day job? Like how do you think about these? Are they different when you're just doing something fun, or do you do the same way on both sides?
No, like I like the frameworks, whatever. I like them for the big apps or whatever. There's absolutely, I mean, it'd have to be one hell of a project to get me to load up React or Angular for one of my personal projects. It's like jQuery. Get jQuery, get it in there. Just, you know, what is it? Bootstrap? Fine, sure, whatever. Just make it run. I don't want to, like the stuff that is boilerplate or getting stuff, you know, running. I just don't care about it for my personal projects. It's not fun. I want to make LEDs light up. So the way of thinking is very much much more streamlined to just sort of doing the one thing. Because all of these, like, all of the servers and the hardware stuff is usually just a single task, and it's just converting stuff from one API to another. It doesn't need to have all that stuff. So
I'm sure lots of unit tests on those personal projects.
Yes, absolutely. Needs to have all the nines.
all the nines, all the uptime in the world for TweetScript.
Yes, can't have that go down. Millions depend on it.
So how did that, so which side were you developing first? Did you start on art projects first and then you started like professionally developing, or was it the other way around? Like, where did you start developing first?
It was a lot like, you need to have confidence of as a developer before you can really start getting artsy with it. For me anyway, like, and I did a lot of data visualization for a while too, and that was also a pretty good bridge between, like, I was working with data, like applications with a ton of data, and data visualization in D3 was a really great way to kind of start thinking about, like, this is not just data that you put in a table and like do stuff with. It's data that you can have mapped to pretty circles that interact with stuff. Like when you click on something, your data underneath changes. So it was development first, and then getting confident enough to be able to be more creative with the code that I was writing and the projects that I was doing. That's what you asked, right? I think.
Yes, that was exactly what I was asking. Of like, did you build like some artistic projects while you were going through school, and that's what, you know, gave you the passion to get into it professionally, or did you take that knowledge professionally and then apply it to art?
Gotcha. No, I mean, like, I did art in high school, and then when I started doing computer science stuff, it was like, I mean, to be honest, I did not do really well in college my first couple of years. It took a couple of years for it to click, for programming to kind of start.
There's a lot of good bars in Winona.
Yeah, well, no, it wasn't even that. Like, to be honest, I was just struggling for a long time, and I wasn't old enough to drink, and I was too boring to be cool, I guess. But once I started understanding my classes and it stopped being just a big bummer, then I don't know, I started making more friends too at that time. And I don't know, everything sort of kind of came together a little bit better for Kristina. But the first couple of years were rough. So, and then, yeah, but I didn't do any of that. I was focusing on, well, I mean, the bars in Winona and also my classes. So
life hack from Kristina: stop being a big bummer, and life all just kind of comes together.
Yeah, I think, yeah, life had to stop being a bummer, which I don't know. I think it's just growing up. So
you mentioned jQuery, you mentioned React and Jest. Like, how have you seen the web world, the front end world, change over your time as a web developer?
It just seems like I don't know. When you think about it, like, what was I doing when I graduated in 2008, and like, what was the scope of my job then versus what was the scope of my job then, versus what's the scope of my job now? And I think because there's so many tools now to make it easier for the front-end developer to really get into deployment and to get into, you know, it isn't just like this, like here's our JSP page that you will put, you know, HTML into. It's like you write everything now, and you take care of the deployment now, and you do all this stuff. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen. Everything, the way stuff changes, you just have to respond. And I mean, it could just be I've gotten older too, and I've transitioned from being a junior developer to a senior developer. But it just seems to me like there's a lot more tools out there to really make sure that the web dev, or that the front end dev, is like in control of their entire, like, the delivery process and everything. You guys see that as true too?
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit, and I still wonder every day if it's harder to get into front-end development now or easier. I mean, like, back when I started, for the most part, it was like the days just before jQuery and MooTools and like the original framework days. And that was like revolutionary, and it was such a joy to work on those tools, but they were just like drop-in libraries, right?
Right, yeah.
They weren't build tools, And it seems like now we write almost as much JavaScript for tooling as we do that actually goes out to the page. And now the frameworks are very, what is the word? Prescriptive. You need to do things a certain way. We're worrying about stuff like typing with Flow or TypeScript. I don't know. I don't know if it's easier or harder. What do you think, Todd?
I think in a lot of ways, the scope of what we're all being asked to do has gotten a lot bigger. Whereas when we started, it was about, hey, I want to build some interaction on this page. So let me slap in a script tag. We're going to bring in some jQuery. We're going to put a little date picker in there. We're going to make this happen. And we didn't really care about anything else. And now we care about like the optimization of the page, right? So we bundle everything down to make sure we're delivering as little as possible. And we care about the environment itself. So now we're doing like DevOpsy stuff and like how was the configuration of our server. And then it's not just about like, does Netscape and Internet Explorer render this page correctly? Now we have lots of browsers that have their normal interpretations, but then also accessibility things. Like, just because I made it look right, does that mean that everybody can get at it? Can my page get attacked via these different angles like we talked about last week? Do I need to be caring about content security policy and how my website is going to be like exposing user information? I just think we're being pushed into this in a direction where the web is so important, where it probably wasn't as important 10 years ago, that we have to care about a lot more. And I don't know if maybe that means that our industry needs to start specializing. I don't know. It's hard. There's a lot going on.
Specializing even more. I'm a Webpack developer.
Well, that's already happened. Like I hear people talk about themselves as Angular developers.
Oh,
like,
sure.
They know Angular. They only know Angular. Like if you show them like JavaScript without Angular, they're like, what language is that? I don't... How do I get access to the scope?
Yeah, I don't know. For new people, though, like, because I don't know, it seems like every few months on Twitter, something goes around about just like, oh, I guess another framework was released. Like, JavaScript programming is so hard. And it's like, you don't need to embrace everything, though. Like, as a new person, when I talk to junior developers, it's like, you don't have to think that you have to know all this stuff. Like, you'll learn it. But if you go into a job as a junior developer and they expect you to know all this stuff, like that's on them. Like, just take the pieces just take a piece that makes sense and get good at it. And then you can kind of add on to that. But you can't expect yourself to be able to get dropped into this and just know everything right away, because there's a lot. And you don't need to embrace every new framework all the time. You can just sort of, I don't know.
That's something that doesn't go away. So, for example, I joined DevTools like 6 months ago, and it's still like the sucker punch that you get when you jump on a project. And you're like, I'm going to be great. I'm going to do all the things. And you like jump into the code or the new tools or frameworks, and you're like, you freeze for a minute. You're like, oh my. I don't think that doesn't go away, but I also think that that's really healthy. It's healthy to... it's like when a performer who's been singing for 30 years says they still get butterflies before they go up on, like that's healthy for you. That's good for you. But if you let it paralyze you, it can be terrible. Speaking of, like, summing up, the skill set that you've gathered in both your, your work life and then your I was going to say fun life, but that's weird. Your like, your fun dev experience. How has working in hardware or outside the traditional browser server, like, sort of shaped the way that you've thought about being a programmer, shaped the way that you've thought about coding?
Like, the thing about hardware that you have to kind of get used to is like there's this whole other like area for things to go wrong in. So like your code doesn't compile or something, like you restart your computer, it still doesn't work. All right, well, it's not the hardware. Like all you do for your hardware side for your code is like restart it and maybe something was cached incorrectly or whatever. But you can have bad USB cables. You can have, you buy some of these components from cheaper sources, like maybe the component's bad. Or I was trying to build a thing where I could walk down the street and it would map out the wireless networks it found. And I had built it and I had everything like working. War walking, yeah. And so I had a photon and a GPS thing on the same, like a half breadboard, like just a little thing. And the GPS module was working on a regular Arduino, and the particle was working independently. But when I had them together, and I could not figure out, like, am I wiring this up wrong? I was like looking at the library. I'm trying to figure out debugging. The thing just, the GPS core, well, like the thing about debugging is the GPS module is set up to just do a thing. So it handles talking to the satellites in space or whatever. It's just supposed to hook up there and then send data to the microcontroller you plug it into. And I'm like going out of my mind because I can't figure out what the deal is. And like when you're new and before you get a certain amount of confidence, it's always, I'm doing something wrong. I don't understand this. I'm completely out of my element. This sucks. I'm going to throw everything out the window and just go back into the forest and paint. But what it ended up being is, so I had it on a little breadboard. When I put it on a big breadboard, it was great, worked fine. And it was an interference issue from the GPS trying to get satellite connection and the Wi-Fi signaling of the photon. And like how, like that isn't something that comes up too often in computer software. So I think the main thing that it kind of taught me was just
your
like,
CSS is breaking the JavaScript.
Yeah,
they're next to each other.
Yeah, if that ever happens, like I don't know what to tell you. But I got a lot more like, okay, so this is not, I mean, because you still get, you know, we laugh about it, but there's still bugs that you get in your code that are just like, I literally cannot comprehend what is going on between point A and point B here. Like what, like you break it down and you want to blame yourself because that's where I'm always at. But like, it doesn't, you know, just because it's hard or whatever, it's not you. And it could just be a bajillion other things that are wrong. And it's just trying to, I think it really helped me say, like, here are the two parts that you're trying to connect up together. Like, what is it that's happening between this where something could be going wrong? And just giving myself a lot more confidence when you try to do new things like experimentation. Because no matter what, you're not going to electrocute yourself with JavaScript. Well, maybe, but it'd be very hard. And if you might electrocute yourself when you tinker around with hardware. So there's a lot more confidence that you get when you start playing with a lot of new things. And especially if you don't have an electrical engineering degree, there's always stuff that can happen.
I imagine after debugging an issue like that, where it was literally like there was interference in the universe preventing this thing from working.
I needed to move it like a few inches apart, and then everything was solved. And I spent like days, and I was on the forums, I took pictures, like, and you know, the people there are smart, but they're not going to really think about wireless interference. Like when they look at your, like if someone had run into it, they might have called it out, but nobody there had. So they're just kind of like, I don't know, it should be working. And everyone's like, it should be working. And I'm just like, it's not though, but yeah.
But the day you figure it out and then you go back to work in this nice, easy playground that we live in of software only, where the universe isn't out to destroy us. You just must feel like a superhero. Like, I can do anything. I can fix hardware bugs, software bugs tremble before me.
Yeah, well, like all the asynchronous stuff, like the main thing for the longest time, and it's getting a little easier now, but like asynchronous stuff in JavaScript, like when you first start doing data visualizations and stuff isn't lining up right, it will drive you absolutely bananas. And now it's like, well, bring it. I don't know. I can figure this out. So
that's awesome. I spent all day working on an async intermittent bug. And
yeah, those are the worst.
I'm just glad that someone else mentions that it's okay to struggle, because I did not feel good about myself yesterday.
No, and it can be, I don't know. I feel like I've taken a step back. Some of the stuff that I end up like having issues with, it's like, Kristina, you should have figured this out years ago, but it's just in a different context, it can really mess you up. So, oh, and another thing is you learn, so you get, like with hardware, you learn who to get good advice from, which is, you know, you get good advice from the community and everything like that. But you also learn who unintentionally is giving you maybe bad advice that you should ignore. Like when well, this was actually for the kitchen project, I needed a little thing that spins a servo. And I went to, and I needed it fast. And this was, I think, before Amazon started really selling this stuff. And so I went to a hobby store, and because my dad had said, oh, just look at a hobby store. And I'm like, okay. So I'd gone there and I asked the guy behind the counter at the hobby store, like, are the servos that you sell for these RC cars the same that you would buy for like an Arduino project? And he's like, no, they're different. And like previous Kristina would be like, oh, this employee, this knowledgeable person has just told me that these are different. Like, I guess I'll be on my way then. And I'm like, okay, can I just see them? And he shows them to me, and yeah, they're the exact same thing. Like, they're just, but you know, the hardware
and
store
modern
guys,
jaded Kristina's like, he works at a hobby store. He doesn't know shit.
Well, it's just, you know, different. You know, he doesn't have to know that stuff. Like, he doesn't have to know about Arduino stuff. So, but yeah, you kind of, I guess I haven't gotten that as cut and dry in that in software, but you know, you have to learn who you can get advice from and who maybe doesn't have all of the information to really help you.
That's a very political way to put it.
This is a live podcast, so I have to watch the sass. I said I was going to have some hot takes on here, and I'm really giving off some lukewarm takes.
All right,
so.
I'm gonna give you another opportunity for a hot take. So you mentioned you just dropped a book, right?
Yes.
So I dropped a link to it out in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
I know a number of people have either written books or have thought about writing books over the years. What is your experience? Was it good? Was it bad? Who did you work with? Like, tell us the story about writing a book.
So the guy who edited John Beistel, he's in Minnesota, and he approached me like 4 years ago saying like, hey, I want to put an LED book together. Why don't you put up the sash or the tweet skirt? And so I'm like, that's great. And we went around to different publishers. Like, I feel like I had written it, but the chapter, basically this book has been in development for about 3 or 4 years. And that's not, I'm not going to blame anybody. It's fine. Whatever. That's another lukewarm take from Kristina, but,
Kristina's lukewarm takes.
Yeah, take that. But, I would recommend it. It is super rewarding. Like, my dad texted me a picture of the book because I told him that I was going to get a couple copies. I'd just give him one. He didn't need to buy it. And he texted me a picture of him holding the book, and he's like, will you sign it for me? And there's nothing like that is I don't know. It was the cutest thing in the world. So anyway, there's nothing that beats that. And like for all the 3 years of sort of being like, what ended up happening is it got dragged out, and No Starch has a very a long technical review process. I think that's, someone told me, is longer than other publishing places. So they really have someone go in there and try to build the projects in the book, which is good. It just takes a while. But for all of like, you're never going to get an experience like seeing your own stuff like in like a book. And that's really, really fun. I would say money-wise, like I'm glad that's not my main job is writing. Maybe it's different for other people, but I only wrote like a chapter in that book. So maybe that's the part of my cut isn't that good. But just know that it'll probably go longer than you thought. And then for that time, you're sort of like on call a little bit with it, where like the editor would come back with, hey, I have another round of edits. Can you review them? And then it would be like months from the last time they asked. And so it's and then they'd want it in like a few days. And so I was pretty good at being like, how about instead of on Friday, I will have the weekend to look over it and do it Monday. And we could usually come up with something like that. But the most part was the timeline was longer than I thought. You do have to kind of be on the hook whenever they want you for something, which sucks because you're at a certain point, after like a few years, you're just kind of like, just whatever, I don't care, just write it, it's fine. You know, the pictures are fine, get it out there. So definitely do it if you want to. Just kind of know that you're probably going to end up being more annoyed than you thought going in. It's not like a quick process.
That is the best endorsement ever. Definitely do it if you want to be annoyed that the process take too long.
I mean, is it worth it? Yeah. Now that it's all over, I'd say it was worth it. But it was a lot of, in the meantime, like if you would have asked me like a year ago at this time if it was worth it, I would say no. But having that book now is like, that's pretty awesome.
That is some pretty good cred of being able to show up with a book and be like, look, I made this.
Yeah. Are we allowed to swear in here? Probably not. I'll be good.
You can do what you want.
I did this, motherfucker.
We're not I swore already. It's up to you. We're just putting this live on YouTube, and there'll be like 8 people who will watch it, but it'll be sweet.
Well, I just said the F word to 8 people, so I'm sorry, everyone. I'm not, though. I wrote this book, motherfuckers. Great.
That is so becoming a GIF and going on Twitter. All right. I think we are wrapping it up. So as per usual, we're going to go around and kind of talk about what maybe one big takeaway from our conversation is. So David, why don't you go first?
My biggest takeaway, I'm inspired. My kids, you know, they played the Raspberry Pi for a good 10 minutes before they got bored. But I think with
Daddy, these games look crappy and old.
I know. I think that I don't know. I walk away from this being inspired to I want to say take a risk, but being electrocuted isn't the risk. I want to.
You're not going to let it keep yourself that bad. It's fine.
That bad. So one of the excuses that I made to myself forever, while the Raspberry Pi I bought sat on the shelf for a year, it's like, I'm not a hardware guy. I don't have the confidence to do this. I don't know how to do this. And the day that I pushed myself over the edge to do it, I had the RetroPie up and working in 15 minutes, right?
Yep.
So it was like a mental barrier for me. And I think that having Kristina talk us through, you know, some of her early work and how it sort of progressed and some of the stuff that she did, I think I'm ready to push myself into doing something new so that I can be a hero to my kids for like 20 minutes this time. I think that they'd love something like that. And I'm ready to try something new with hardware. So thank you to Kristina for inspiring me to push myself into to doing this.
And if I can give a piece of advice real quick, sorry to interrupt, but people ask me a lot, especially like dads who are looking to get their daughters into tech. And my advice is always like, find something the kid is already interested in and see if you can think of a project that kind of goes along with their interests already, something that will make that interest better or easier or more fun or something that kind of does that. Because if you can show them how technology is good to augment something they already like to do, that's awesome. But I don't have any kids, so I'm talking out of my ass a little bit, but like
now
that's how it worked for me.
Like an LED Pokemon something. And now I'm not pushing myself into it. I'm out. How about you, Todd? What did you learn today?
Well, first I want to see you put your money where your mouth is. Beginning of next week's show, you're going to bring us your project, right? Going to do a little show and tell.
My wife is out of town this weekend, so I'm going to be wrangling
Cop out
monsters. I'm going to go to the store and bring in something that was an LED thing that was very obviously purchased. How about you?
It's still got some like made in China tag on the bottom.
Yeah.
No, this is totally DIY, you guys.
You guys, I made this. This is it. Look. I love when people in software get into art and like make technology into art. I think that is super fun when people do that. I've loved watching like the different projects that you've made over the years. Unfortunately, I never got to actually play the tweet skirt. I think that was a little bit before we met, maybe.
Yeah,
but
there's a reason it doesn't really come out anymore. It broke a lot. Like the sash is a lot more robust. So
yeah, you get better as you go. But maybe there should be a Tetris sash.
I could do that.
Ooh.
The code's all still there. It's all on GitHub, so I can make it happen.
If you wouldn't mind sending me that so I could show it on the show next week, I would love it.
But yeah,
just anything so I can prove to Todd that I actually did something.
Oh, I see.
Quite obviously didn't.
I'm not sure how Kristina's shipping you the tweet skirt and then you showing it is going to win anything because I know it exists.
Oh, I just thought the idea of like I would send him a video and he'd be like, I took this video, and it would be like just obviously like you know, like a cat walks in front of it, that you don't have a cat or something like that.
Yeah, it's like Kristina's obviously in the background of this video. This is no, no, this isn't not going to work.
I'll send you all the videos, but I'm going to watermark all of them because I know what's up now.
Damn it.
All right, Kristina, what's your one big thing that is your takeaway from the show, and anything else you'd like to plug before we wrap it up?
No, it makes me happy to know that everyone else's jobs have been getting, the scope of them has been getting bigger, and it's not just like what's been happening to me. It's like everybody's going through it. So we're all in this together, you guys. That's good.
We're all in this together.
Yeah.
All right. Where can people pick up this book with your chapter in it?
It is nostarch.com/LED projects. I think there's a link out there. It's available like ebook or print. Yeah, and I think that's really it. I mean, everything that I have is on my portfolio at portfolio.gelicia.com. You can see some of my past work there.
I'm going to get a thing for that put out into the chat as well, so the other people don't have to try and remember that and type it out. I will get that posted here shortly. All right. Well, so thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day to be with us. I think this was a great show.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely.
I love talking about this stuff.
We'll be back next week. We're going to have Elle Waters on the show to talk about web accessibility and a bunch of stuff that you probably shouldn't do in your HTML. I think that's going to be another great show. We'll be back next week at our regular time. Until then, I'm Todd Gardner.
I'm David Walsh. Goodbye.
Thanks so much for joining us.